latest observations in a report where you say that inflation has peaked in India while growth has tanked or is tanking. I want to ask you, has inflation peaked or is it an artificial peak, or a dip, because petrol and diesel price hikes that should have naturally happened over the last few months have not happened because there is an artificial freeze on daily price movements?
So I think it's important to understand that inflationary pressures are still pretty much live, right? So even though arithmetically it may have peaked, so essentially inflation in September hit 7.4%. Part of this is because of what in economics we call lower base. So the inflation last year for the same month was lower, and hence this inflation is a bit higher. But I guess what is worrying is that if you unpack the inflation reading, you'll find that on the food inflation side, pressures are broad-based. So a number of food items have shown upward revisions. I guess what is sort of even more worrying is the fact that within core inflation, so core is when you take out food and fuel and even petrol and diesel, if you like, from the basket. Core inflation is quite sticky for India. It's been remaining elevated. Core goods inflation continues to inch up. This is despite global commodity prices falling. So essentially what firms are doing is they're saying, all right, this will help our margins, but the price pressures are still being incident on consumers. Core services inflation is also pretty sticky. So a combination of all these factors sort of make us feel that underlying inflation is sort of more at around 6% or so level, if not a bit higher. Now, you're right about petrol, diesel prices being constant for a long period of time. So this is despite crude oil prices somewhat falling. So essentially when crude oil prices rose quite a lot, then petrol, diesel prices didn't rise as much. And so there were under recoveries for oil marketing companies that they're trying to recoup at this point. But looking forward, inflation, we are concerned about high inflation in India. One, we are already seeing very high cereal prices, wheat prices quite elevated, stocks are low there. We could have further food inflation prices, food inflation feeding in the rest of the year. Also, we are seeing this very familiar pattern of firms passing on higher costs, both on the goods side and the services side, and that kind of sticky inflation is still pretty much there. And we are always cautious about what, again, in economics we call second round effects. So when you've had high inflation for a very long time, you're really worried that inflation expectations go up. So your audience looks at here's your report and says, oh my God, inflation is rising, hence my expectations rise. And when that happens, that creates a kind of loop which brings higher inflation second round, which leads to higher wages. And that's another thing that we need to monitor. I'm not saying they're there yet, but these are pressures that we need to monitor. So overall, we are quite concerned on the inflation front. We are expecting 6.8% in this fiscal year.
Okay.